Okay, let's dive into this explainer. Welcome. Today, we're exploring a monumental shift in one of the world's oldest, most deeply rooted organizations. We're looking at the Second Vatican Council, which was a pivotal event dedicated entirely to modernizing the Catholic Church. And this wasn't just some minor policy update or a few tweaks to the rulebook. No way. This was a seismic cultural shift that instantly impacted hundreds of millions of people all across the globe. If you've ever wondered how a massive historic institution actually pivots and adapts, well, this is exactly what we're going to unpack right now. I mean, seriously, how exactly does a 2,000-year-old institution adapt to the modern world? It's a fascinating problem, isn't it? When you've got literally millennia of tradition, making even the slightest change is just a monumental task. But think about the context here. We're talking about the mid-20th century. The 1960s were this era of rapid, totally unprecedented change. You had the space race, the civil rights movement, and a completely transformed post-World War II society. The cultural landscape was shifting at warp speed, and the pressure on the Catholic Church to adapt to this new reality, it had suddenly reached a boiling point. They realized they desperately needed to figure out how to bridge the gap between their ancient traditions and modern life just to remain relevant. Section 1. Life before Vatican II. So why did the church feel so distant back then? I want you to close your eyes for a second and just imagine walking into a church before the year 1962. It was a vastly different experience from what most folks are used to today. There was this strict, centuries-old status quo in place, steeped in deep tradition and an undeniable, almost heavy solemnity. Picture yourself as just an ordinary person attending a service during this era. You're sitting there in the pews, genuinely trying to connect with your faith, but there is this profound, almost impenetrable psychological barrier between you and the deeply mysterious rituals happening all the way up at the altar. Let's break down exactly what created that barrier. For starters, Mass was celebrated entirely in Latin. Now, obviously, this is a beautiful, ancient language, but the vast majority of everyday people simply didn't speak or understand a word of it. On top of that, the priest literally faced away from the congregation. Historically, sure, there was a deeply theological reason for this. The priest was facing liturgical east, leading the people toward God. It wasn't some intentional slight meant to ignore the congregation, but the practical effect? It felt incredibly alienating. You were essentially a passive spectator, just watching someone else perform an incomprehensible ritual on your behalf. Because of that massive language barrier and the physical orientation of the priest, the church often felt incredibly distant and totally disconnected from the everyday, ordinary life of its members. Section 2. The Worldwide Meeting. Enter Pope John the 23rd. He was renowned for his extraordinary warmth and wit, and he recognized this growing disconnect. He decided it was an absolute necessity to act, and act big. He called a massive, unprecedented gathering right in the heart of Vatican City to tackle these exact issues. And guys, this wasn't just some quick weekend summit. The council kicked off in 1962 and didn't wrap up until 1965. For 3 solid years, leaders dedicated themselves to intense discussion and debate. What's truly remarkable here is that Pope John actually passed away less than a year into the council. That absolutely could have derailed the entire process, but his successor, Pope Paul VI, seamlessly picked up the baton to keep that momentum going, leading to a sustained, highly concentrated effort to rethink how the church interacted with the modern era. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that massive number, 2,000. Over 2,000 Catholic bishops traveled from literally every corner of the globe to attend this council. Just think about the sheer logistical nightmare of housing and organizing that many leaders in Rome in 1962. In fact, the Vatican actually had to install state-of-the-art microphones and incredibly extensive tiered seating in St. Peter's Basilica just so this massive global crowd could actually hear each other debate. This wasn't some small group of insiders making decisions behind closed doors. It was a truly global representation of the church coming together to hammer out a path forward. So, what exactly were they trying to achieve with all those leaders packed into one place? Well, the council set out with 4 very clear aims. They wanted to renew the church from within and make Catholicism much easier for ordinary people to understand. They also sought to deeply improve their relationships with the modern world. But another massive goal was to encourage unity among all Christians. And this was a huge deal, because prior to Vatican II, the church had a much more exclusionary stance toward other Christian denominations. This new approach, it was a radical olive branch. They deliberately set out to bridge the gap, bringing down walls and making the faith highly accessible and relevant once again. Section 3. The Big Changes.
And this brilliantly illustrates some truly remarkable, tangible outcomes. We completely transitioned from the old way, Mass in Latin with the priest facing the altar, to a totally new reality where Mass could finally be celebrated in local languages. I want you to pause and just imagine the emotional weight of that moment for a second. Imagine being a lifelong churchgoer, walking in one Sunday, and suddenly hearing the most sacred rituals spoken in your native tongue for the very first time. It was an overnight, radical shift in the user experience of the faith. Furthermore, lay people, the ordinary members of the congregation, stepped up to become much more actively involved in the service, doing things like reading scriptures and leading responses. It completely transformed what was once an incomprehensible ritual into an inclusive, deeply participatory experience.
But the transformation wasn't just happening inside the four walls of the church building. Their broader worldview shifted drastically. The old mindset, where the church remained distant and separate from secular life, was fully replaced by a directive to actively engage in dialogue with society. And what did this actually mean in concrete terms? Well, it meant the church started publicly advocating for human rights and fiercely defending religious freedom for all people, not just Catholics. It also meant engaging directly and respectfully with the global scientific community. Instead of retreating from the modern world in fear, they decided to step right into it and engage with it head-on.
Section 4. The Unchanged Core.
Now, as sweeping as these changes were, there is a massive nuance we really need to cover to get the full picture here. So, the crucial point is this. Vatican II did not change core Catholic beliefs. Let me repeat that, because it is literally the anchor of this entire explainer. The foundational theology, things like the belief in the Holy Trinity, the divinity of Christ, or the nature of the sacraments, remained completely untouched. What actually changed was the way the church communicated and worked in the modern world. It was an evolution of the packaging, not the product itself. It was a total revolution in method and delivery, while the underlying theology remained exactly the same. Which leaves us with a truly compelling thought to close on. How will other ancient institutions adapt their methods to survive in our modern world? Whether it's government, education, or other deeply held global traditions, the Second Vatican Council shows us that true survival often requires having the courage to completely change how you communicate, even when your core stays exactly the same. I really hope this explainer has sparked your curiosity about the mechanics of historical change. Thanks so much for learning with me today.